Today we'll be discussing tech to the rescue and how we put a definitive end to hunger. So I'm honored to be sitting here amongst these esteemed global leaders today, and we're going to explore how technology can help us rescue mankind and help to curb hunger. So now for me, exploring tech and the idea of ending world hunger means large-scale systematic change and addressing several key aspects: growing food, managing waste, getting policies in place and governments aligned, and the tech to be synced with each other. Now, there's also the unspoken issue of logistics, customs, shipping. How do we get the supply chain to be aligned and getting food from one place to another? This also includes packaging and storage and roads, something that's often forgotten about. So today we have with us Marcio from Mood Bites, Daria from Red Sea Farms, and Mohammed Ashur from Aspire Food Group. So thank you all for joining us. So let's start by exploring the basic question. Why do we need food tech, and why do we need to solve this? Why is it even an issue? If each of you could just shed light on that.
Hello. Hi. It's a pleasure to be here. So the question is, why do we need food tech, and how can it solve it?
Why are we trying to solve this? Why is it even an issue to begin with?
So I think it's a huge issue, world hunger. I think we never lived in such a wealthy and prosperity, although with all the crises in the world, humanity is in a very high level of prosperity in general in developed countries. So I truly believe that the tech we have developed to make personalized nutrition for sports, to make all of the decisions we're making now with food that is more transparent, can be applied for world hunger.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry, it's hard to...
Oh, it's okay. So why are we trying to solve food tech? Why is it even an issue? And why do we need to solve it?
You're saying why food tech and why we're trying to solve this
Yes,
issue, right?
yes.
I'm so sorry. So
It's okay, I hear an echo too.
yeah, I'll take it from a perspective,
Yes.
because I'm an academic, I will say. So the zeroth law of thermodynamics says, actually, if a system is equal with A and B and C, so that means A and C are equal to. It sounds so simple, but I don't think a food tech is a problem on its own. So food, energy, and water is a nexus that it needs to be broken. So every problem comes with each other. So food production means energy and water. That's why, I mean, they are the three major things that is the survival for human being, you know, and that's why I think it deserves tackling. And, you know, given the issues that climate change, increase of population, and thinking that these people, growing population, will live in the, you know, hot climates. People cannot go anywhere, so they need technologies to be solved and fed in the future.
And for those who are living in harsh climates, why can't we just fly food in from around the world?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are several aspects to it that we can feed people for future, but we cannot do it sustainably, and it's by now very obvious. And that's why in our company, Red Sea Farms, we are aiming to feed the world, but in the most sustainable way possible.
Thank you. Mohammed?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You know, first of all, it's an honor to be here. I was actually born in Jeddah, so in many ways it's a very significant experience to be back. So to address the question, I think it's important to identify two very significant paradoxes that we're facing in our future. The first is that our planet is rapidly growing in both population and appetite. At the same time, it's shrinking in resources with which to produce food. The second paradox is that when you look at malnourishment, malnourishment just simply means being badly nourished. We typically think of malnourishment as people who are hungry. That's part of the equation. But malnourishment can also mean eating too much of the things that are bad for our bodies. And so we have a double burden of malnutrition in the world, where in some countries you have hunger, and in other countries you have obesity and diabetes driven by overnutrition of calories that are harmful to the body. And so years ago, my co-founders and I looked at this problem and we started thinking, if we want to develop a future-proof, climate-resilient, drought-resistant, and scalable food production system, we have to think radically outside the box, and we have to leverage technology, which is a significant resource we have, to really help us to produce food at a scale that was previously unthinkable in history.
Amazing. And now why, I guess, how is Aspire doing this?
So at Aspire, years ago, we looked at this problem, and first we started thinking about food security. And in food security is defined as not having access to safe, affordable, and nutritious food. And that's important because, Marcio and I were talking about this before, you could address hunger, but that doesn't necessarily mean what people are eating is nutritious. So you have to go a step above just the baseline of feeding someone and actually making sure what they're eating is nutritious. But then you have to go a step even higher than that and start thinking about food sovereignty. How do you actually liberate and emancipate populations to actually produce their own foods? And that's because there are some countries in the world, based on their geography and their location, that are tremendously blessed in their ability to produce foods. But there are other countries that are simply not. And so how do you bridge that disadvantage? So at Aspire, we started looking at protein production. And specifically, when you look at livestock production around the world, we know that cattle, for example, contribute massively to greenhouse gas emissions. So like the agriculture sector contributes more to greenhouses than the entire transportation sector combined. And the reason is because some of the animals that we eat, delicious as they are incredibly inefficient at converting what they eat into protein. So if you think of a cow needs to eat 8 kilos of feed just to give you 1 kilo of meat. And so think of the amount of land, water, energy, fertilizer, and the shipment and transportation just to produce this 1 kilo. And so we thought to ourselves, is there a protein source that already exists in the world that can potentially address this problem? And of course, the answer we found was insects. Insects are widely consumed around the world in about 80% of the world's countries. And unlike a cow, which needs about 8 kilos of feed to produce 1 kilo of meat, with insects, that conversion is 1.2 to 1. So you're using a fraction of the amount of land, water, and resources. And so that was the solution we envisioned, and the question for us was, can we build a scalable, modular, high-tech way to produce insect protein in an indoor, climate-controlled environment so that you could effectively set up these facilities in any geography, in any climate, to produce protein security for populations around the world, and that's what gave birth to my company, Aspire.
So if I understand correctly, you're trying to feed us insect burgers. Is that correct?
Yeah, not so much burgers, but if you take any protein and you turn it into a powder, it becomes very palatable. I mean, most of the foods that we consume are actually processed in this way because that's how they're ultimately made into their final form factor. Now, of course, we also, beyond just looking at people, we have to also think about animals. I mean, feeding animals, whether they are agricultural, livestock animals, or pets, has now also contributed massively to the climate change problem. Many people, in Saudi Arabia may not appreciate this, but the pet food market globally is a $90 billion market. Americans spend $30 billion every year on their pets. And actually, during the pandemic, the last member of the household to feel the economic pain of the pandemic was often the pet. So people would, buy cheaper food for themselves, but when it comes to their pets, they were still buying the highest quality foods. So we're thinking about how there's a huge protein gap, whether the consumer is a human or an animal. How do we contribute to solving this gap?
Thank you. So now, Daria, touching on what Mohammed said about climate change and the extreme conditions, what are the red zones of climate changes that are happening, and how is Red Seas addressing them? And what do we need to do to start operating around those or solving them?
I'll try to answer in the possible way that I understood the question. Well, as Mohammed also mentioned, we are actually facing growth as a world, but then we are shrinking in terms of resources. And humans actually consuming 90% of the water and for food production, and the energy is also utilized for our future, you can find in LEAP. So as Red Sea Farms, we are aiming to solve these huge problems with our technologies in order to actually feed the world sustainably. And why we need that is obvious. As again, Mohammed mentioned, I was talking to him, I said, some people are hungry, but some people are more hungry. If you look geographically, 1/3 of the people live in the equatorial region. And as I try to say, like, they will not go anywhere. Even if the climate change is there, they will keep living there. So what we need to do is come up with the technologies that are local and customized. There's no one magic silver bullet technology that's going to solve the world hunger. That's why we need to look geographically in order to figure out what are the abundant resources, right? So if you look to Saudi Arabia, get out now and look above, sun is out there. And on the other hand, if you look around, there's lots of seawater, but we cannot consume, right? If you look to greenhouses and agriculture technology, 90% of the water is actually used for cooling in this region, except, in the developed countries that they're trying to heat their greenhouses. Well, it's good, you can say use it, but how water is utilized here is again massively desalinated and completely economically not viable, and it's gross for the future as well. And if you try to look underneath, okay, I'll just pump water and take it out, and you dig down and you can't find fresh water, that is already a lot of salty water. So you may think, what are we doing now? So there are no technologies, so we should find really transforming technologies that can solve that. And that's what we are doing actually with our saltwater cooling technologies, and then using sustainable energies like sun for this specifically region, Saudi and MENA, and now Sky is here as well, GCC. We are aiming for the net zero and even positive greenhouses. So this doesn't come on its own, because, okay, you have it, you're feeding, what's the feedback? Again, we were talking with Marcio, how can you track this? How can you, observe that? The future is data, and it's so valuable, and we all know it, and that's why, as Red Sea Farms, we're investing our efforts to develop our own database and sensor systems, because we have realized when we are doing these technologies, actually none of the available systems were serving for our purposes to get data, especially for this region, even hardware surviving in this region. So we are heavily investing on data so that it can feedback us, and actually in the future aiming for the machine learning, etc., that we can really utilize these sustainable technologies to feed the world. Now that's how actually the whole water, energy and food nexus can be broken. You need to come up with really transforming technologies rather than how can we make an existing technology better and fit to this specific region, and that's what we are doing.
So we obviously cannot go with traditional farming anymore to solve food security and the hunger crisis. Now Marcio and Sky, you have both talked about being this trendy tech farmer. Can each of you shed light on what that means to be a tech farmer or a trendy farmer, and how each of you are working to operate as that and not the traditional farming?
We had that little talk, yeah? So basically what I see is that the same way that chefs became very trendy and rock stars, I think the next change in this industry is that the farmer's gonna follow the same route. So I can start to imagine this reality shows that show how the farmer now uses technology to monitor all his crops. How can he deploy his tractors from home? How can he have his drones analyzing where the bugs are coming or what sort of infections he has? And that will make a big gap between the last generation of farmers and the new one coming, because it will be attractive. It won't be something that you get your hands so dirty as it was before. It's about deploying the technology we have to make it attractive and to make it simple and to make it efficient. Because one thing is that we have all these tools, another thing is that we have something very important, which is data. Data now is allowing us to really have the whole spectrum of why is the food not leaving the farm, for example. Was it because it's too small, ugly, or is it a problem of in this region everybody is growing the same vegetables, so they decrease the amount that can come to the market? All of that will be now analyzed with the spectrum of data that will allow us to make an impact in what we produce is really arriving to the consumer.
Now Sky, tech farming, looks like Pure Harvest has been working to do that and solving it on a global scale. How is Pure Harvest a tech farming business, and how are you different from traditional farming?
Well, first of all, I apologize I'm late. This might be the first time in history a conference is ahead of schedule. Really well done. Commenting on that, we characterize ourselves as technology enabled. We aren't a tech company because we don't sell technology, and that's not how we monetize our solution and make money. We make money by farming, by feeding people. And I think what's, to touch on the role of technology in what we do, we view ourselves uniquely as an energy company. We convert sun energy into calories as cheaply as possible. And really our energy powers humans, right? But how do we do that? It involves many technologies. We're fundamentally doing what we can to optimize and capture as much light as possible. So for example, you may be aware we're developing a novel roof washing solution. It's a AI-powered robot roof washer that meets our unique demands in ensuring that our greenhouse remains clean, right? Because ultimately, when you have humidity and then the dust strikes the greenhouse, it blocks light, light is yield, and yield is money, right? And it's our earnings power. And then we innovate on energy infrastructure. In our current farm in Saudi Arabia, we're partnered with Nadek, the major dairy company, and we have built, integrated with a 30 megawatt solar power farm. We use that to give us both access to renewable energy, but also affordable energy that's available to us and allows us to power climate systems, reducing both our carbon footprint, but also our cost structure, allowing us to control the climate and offer perfect environmental conditions to our fresh produce. And that's an energy technology, both partnership and novel development. And then maybe a final example, we're doing all kinds of things inside the greenhouse. You mentioned the use of sensors and data. We both partner and develop our own solutions. We have the philosophy that you buy what you can, you build what you must, and if there isn't a solution available to capture the unique insights that we need, which you experience a lot in this region, particularly in tackling humidity, which is the hardest thing to tackle. It isn't the heat that kills us here, it's the humidity. We develop sensor solutions, also optical solutions to better track the health and performance of our plants. And I think in totality, that is how we are technology enabled. We use tech to drive the outcome of more efficient farming, not a tech company. And I think as Pure Harvest Smart Farms, we position ourselves a bit differently than some other players in the industry, like say AeroFarms or others. I believe it's a solution that focuses on the affordability of food and the fact that we farm for a living.
Great, thank you. Now, as you're all aware, we need tech to grow food, but how do we pay for this tech? We need capital, and this requires investments from people, from governments, from nations. So Sky, what does this landscape look like for those who want to invest and for nations to invest in this landscape?
Well, I think there's two landscapes. There's global and regional, and actually the reason I was late is I was busy singing for my supper to secure more capital, which went successfully, so it was worthwhile. But it is fundamentally, we're food infrastructure. This is capital intensive, and it requires, I believe that as we skate forward and as our technologies mature, it's eventually going to merge that those who produce food most effectively are able to access affordable energy and renewable energy and affordable capital. Because eventually the technologies will compete away the excess return in the industry available to the novel producer. We're way early days for that, but I'm just getting to the end because it becomes about capital. Both capital in the infrastructure needs and to supply the power and energy and systems we need to power these farms, but then also in actually building them, right? We design, build, and construct and operate these very large-scale farms. So globally, there is a boom in this space, right? Controlled environment ag touches 4 key verticals on climate change, on governments and backing visions and food security, on technological innovation, and on changing consumer preferences. The consumers are increasing their desire for local premium product, caring where their food's from, traceability, safety, etc. Any one of these themes could have an entire venture capital fund dedicated, and many do. This has all of them, right? That is why you see a global boom in controlled environment ag. It is an undeniable business opportunity. Now it's about backing entrepreneurs and companies that are developing solutions that solve that future state of the world in food. Globally, it's booming. Regionally, it used to be hard. And when this started out, it was brutal to raise capital. I think that it was novel, asset-intensive, ag tech, onshore, IoT, all of these things that didn't exist in our novel, emerging venture capital ecosystem. However, that's changing very quickly. Funds are getting involved, international capital's finding us and you and others. also governments are putting their money where their mouth is. The Ag Development Fund here in Saudi Arabia, the Industrial Development Fund, ADIO, the Abu Dhabi Investment Office, ADQ, WAFRA, who backed us, the Sovereign Wealth of Kuwait. There are major capital institutions seeing the importance of food security, water conservation, economic diversification, and sustainability, and they're putting the capital into this space. So it's now an exciting place to be. A lot less hard than it was 4 or 5 years ago, but that's a good thing. That's called a growing entrepreneurial ecosystem, and it's what we're all here to back at LEAP.
Now, there are still some nations in the world where they're not moving or acting fast enough for food security. What do you think the landscape will look like in the next 10 to 15 years if governments don't act fast enough to align their policies with tech and supporting these companies?
Well, I would like to point something that we haven't talked about. We're talking about production. One of the biggest problems we have is food losses and food waste. That's a huge impact. 1/3 of all the food we produce is not arriving to any consumer at all. And this is where our company, Essence Food, where we focus, is targeting through data. Why is the food not arriving to the consumer? Is it in the farmer the problem? Is it in the distribution? And we collect these main streams of food and we transform it into powder food. By doing that, the same size that you used to ship 8 containers of food, now you can fit it in 2 with much more precise nutrition. So you can imagine reducing the volume of kiwis or strawberries into powder formats where all the nutrition is compact. And those were previously food losses that were not arriving to any consumer, so they were already a problem for the environment. All the resources we put of water, energy, farming, and then it doesn't arrive anywhere, but it also creates methane into the atmosphere. So we started to create this pilot project. We started in the north region of Spain, where we recover all these waste streams of fruit and vegetables, and we give it a second life, upcycling food. When we have this digital library of ingredients, it's very efficient for us to mix the different powder results and get some powder insect, for example, and get some algae and make a very small biscuit, which we like to call it a smart biscuit, that can arrive to every school in third world countries and give what the kids need to learn in school. So the vision is about being more efficient in terms of not wasting anything. I think the word waste is something from the past. I think we've learned very fast recently that there's nothing to waste, that everything can be recycled, or in this case, upcycled. And the meaning of upcycle, it means that the final product is now valuing more than in its original format. And if you can imagine that all these foods are freeze-dried, it means we have a huge amount of water saved. So for regions like Saudi Arabia or all this part of the world, the Middle East, water is a very neat resource. So if you can imagine that from one side we extract the water of food that was about to be wasted, and on the other side we can feed vertical farming with that water. So we're closing a big loop. And on top of it, you have the bioproducts like the bones of the fruits or the skins of the fruits that in some ways can be replacing our plastics. So you can use that for packaging of the same food. And I believe that in the near future, this will be the biggest impact we can create, is not wasting and upcycling all the streams we have of food so they arrive where they need to with less cost, more effective, and above all, finishing world hunger, or at least contribute to it in a way that is more nutritious, not just sending you a bag of rice, but sending you a bag of rice with 3 grams of powder to add to that rice that will make your nutrition boost in all levels.
Bina, I see we're out of time, but I want to cover this with a macroeconomic argument. We have more people, right? Rising population, climate change rendering traditional ag less efficient, and water is food and food is life. And we don't have more water. In fact, water security is a major issue, including in the exporting nations of the world's food. And most of us focus on fruit and veg, right? That's water. And so China, water issues, huge discussions. America, water issues. These exporting nations will not be able to serve your food needs, and so you need to serve them yourself. And you know this, but I gave a speech at the Wharton Social Impact Investor Conference called Peace in the Middle East Through Tomatoes. And I use that just to fill the room, but the argument I made is that right now we're still 80% import dependent in this region. Saudi's a little less so. But declining water, fast-growing populations, and we export our oil wealth and import dollars, and we use those dollars both to buy goods, but also to fix our currency. If ever post-peak oil demand, we don't have that peg, the currency devalues, food prices rise. You've seen it in Lebanon right now. You've seen it all over the world. That is how you get a food crisis. And I think that if governments don't play a role, which they are right now, I want to highlight they're being great, but if they don't continue to play a role globally in solving this challenge, in supporting technology and more efficient food production on both the supply side and then demand issues on waste and other, we have a food crisis coming, right? But it's completely avoidable if governments act now. And I think that that's part of what this dialogue's about. But I think that's the world if the government doesn't get involved in supporting food security.
Yes.
Great. We have half a minute more. Mohammed, if you want to add something.
Yeah, just I think when going back to your point about technology and food tech, there's this conception that there's a fear to embrace technology in food production, but the reality is technology has always been used in every era, right? Like high tech 50 years ago was new water irrigation systems. Today we happen to have IoT, we happen to have artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, all these kinds of things. My own company, we've raised $150 million to farm crickets indoors, right? And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but if you think about how long it took, and this is just one example and I'll conclude here, the poultry industry took 50 years, 50, to take a chicken and in 57 days increase its weight by 4 times. So in the 1950s, an average chicken weighed about 1.5 kilos, and a number of years later, about 50 years later, it was about, under 1 kilo, and it became about 4 kilos. In 5 years, with a fraction of that amount of investment, we've increased our productivity by 20 times. And our factory that we're building now in Canada will produce 1,000 times more protein per acre than any equivalent form of livestock. So technology has the power to massively accelerate our agricultural productivity, and rather than fear it or see it as something that is threatening, we have to embrace it. But the proof point, and this is up to all entrepreneurs to really prove, is that the technology works. Because unlike other sectors, in agriculture, you don't move fast and break things, because this is food and it's people's livelihoods.
Great, excellent, thank you. Thank you to each one of you for coming out here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.